listening to the Thoughts from a Page podcast, which is a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network. My name is Cindy Burnett, and I love to talk about books with anyone and everyone. While listening to my podcast, you will hear author interviews, behind-the-scenes conversations about various aspects of the publishing world, theme discussions with other book lovers, and more. For more book recommendations and a complete list of all of my interviews, check out my website, thoughtsfromapage.com, and follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Thoughts From a Page. In 2022, I would love to have you join my Patreon group. I offer at least 3 bonus episodes a month. There is a Facebook group where we all discuss books, and we are currently reading 2 advanced copies of books and chatting with the authors pre-publication. I will be offering 2 more of these pre-pub chats soon as well. Thanks to those that already participate, and I hope you will consider joining us. Today, I am chatting with Jennifer Smith about the Unsinkable Greta James. Jennifer is the author of 9 books for young adults, including The Statistical Probability of Love at First Sight and Hello, Goodbye, and Everything in Between, both of which have recently been adapted for film. She earned a master's degree in creative writing from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and her work has been translated into 33 languages. She currently lives in Los Angeles. I absolutely loved The Unsinkable Greta James and thoroughly enjoyed speaking with Jennifer about it. I hope you enjoy listening as well. And now for a quick break. For the last year, I have been focusing more on my health and eating habits. In connection with that, I have started drinking AG1 in the morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my health and energy levels. That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. I recommend AG1 to all of my family and friends because the company has a team of doctors and scientists. It is tested for 950 contaminants and is NSF certified for sport. It is formulated based on the latest science, and it maintains high quality standards. Thanks AG1 for sponsoring my show. AG1 is a supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. That's drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. Check it out. And now back to my show. Welcome, Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad you're here because I absolutely loved The Unsinkable Greta James, and I cannot wait to talk all about it.
Thank you. That's always so nice to hear. I'm pretty excited about this one myself.
I bet you are. I was so happy to see that it was on the March Indie Next list. I love seeing that list every month, and I think it's just wonderful to see what booksellers recommend, and it's just such an honor, I think.
It's the biggest honor. I mean, obviously, as a author, as a former editor, as a reader, indie bookstores are just so important and so valuable, and to get recognized by, the people who are out there hand selling books and recommending things to customers and who are just your people, book people, is the best thing. So I was so delighted and thrilled.
I bet. That is wonderful, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Before we dive in, I would love for you to give me a quick synopsis of The Unsinkable Greta James for those that won't have read it yet.
Yeah, it's the story of a successful indie musician who is still reeling from the sudden death of her mother and winds up on a week-long cruise to Alaska with her dad, who has never exactly been supportive of her life choices. And the trip was meant to be to celebrate her parents' 40th anniversary. So, there's also a romance with a charmingly nerdy professor she meets on board, but it's mostly a love story about Greta and her music and her kind of quest to find her voice again. And so, yeah, that's the sum of it.
Well, where did you come up with the idea for this one? There's a lot in it. I mean, it's a wonderful story. As I'm reading it, I did not feel like there was a lot in it, but you managed to pack a big punch with a lot of different issues, and I just loved that.
Thank you. It's true. I think there's a lot braided together, and it's quite different in a way. I've always written young adult novels, and I love doing that, and it's been such a privilege. But most of my YA books sort of had a romance front and center, and then had kind of, a secondary family story or something else. Whereas this is really, it's a lot of things. It mostly started with, I wanted to explore what it is to live a creative life. And to kind of come as I did from a deeply practical place and a deeply practical family, and to want to pursue not just the arts, but to pursue a career in something that's really uncertain and really unstable, and that just takes a lot of risk and guts and chance and luck, honestly. And I wanted to basically drop in on a character at the moment when the bottom has fallen out and she's kind of at her lowest moment. And then I wanted to put her on a ship in Alaska with the one person in her life who kind of always doubted her and who's basically a walking I told you so, and then see what happened.
Why Alaska and why a cruise ship?
Well, the joke is that I have written now a novel that takes place on an airplane, one that takes place on a train, a road trip story, and now a book that takes place on a cruise. My agent jokes that my next book is going to be a love story set on a scooter, but I'm running out of modes of transportation.
Or a spaceship to the moon.
Or a spaceship, exactly. There's a few left. But yeah, I had gone on a cruise to Alaska with my family. I was really lucky to do that when I was in high school, and it always loomed large. I love travel. I've traveled a lot. There is just nowhere I've been to that's like Alaska. It's unique. It's otherworldly. It's beautiful. It's staggering. I mean, it's incredible. And so it was always sort of in my mind. And I thought there was something about taking these two characters, Greta and her dad, who kind of do not get along and don't quite realize they need to be put in each other's, they've lost their translator. They don't quite realize that like the thing they both need is to be, stuck together on a ship for all this time. And I thought there was something kind of lonely about Alaska. There's something stark about it. And it just seemed to fit the mood. And so I thought when I started writing it that I could kind of get by off memories of the trip I took and YouTube videos of Alaska and, watching other people's vacations. And I realized pretty quickly into writing it that I would need to go there myself in order to really capture it. And so a few years ago, I took a cruise there as a little writing retreat. And it was, it's just, like I said, it's unlike anywhere else in the world, and it's beautiful. And so it was really, I always say this book, it's like three love stories in one. There's, first and foremost, Greta and her music, and then Greta and her dad, and then Greta and the kind of romance she finds on board the ship. But if there's a fourth story, it's definitely Alaska, if there's a fourth love story. And so it was a really, fun setting for a book.
One of my favorite trips that we've ever taken was a cruise to Alaska. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's so beautiful. And like you indicated, just one of those kind of one in a million type trips. And it just brought me back there reading your book. And I think that's one of the things that appealed so much. We had such a wonderful time. The views are so pretty, the whales, bubble net fishing, just all of it. It's just such an extraordinary thing. And so it was fun to do it with them.
I'm so glad. I think, a lot of people who have read the book, who have been on those cruises have said, how it brings them back. And then, lots of people who have not have said it makes them want to go. It's really wonderful and unique. And I also just honestly liked the idea of taking a pretty successful rock star and like sticking her on a cruise ship with her dad, because the kind of people who go on cruise ships are not necessarily like 30-something rock stars. And it was just too much fun of a setup to say, like, take these two very different people at this real intersection moment of their lives and like stick them in line at the buffet.
Well, and I love that when somebody recognized her and she has a thought about a Venn diagram. Yes. And the people that know her and the ship, people that would be on the cruise ship, I was laughing because I was thinking, yes, based on when we went, my kids were some of the only children on that ship. So yes, it's funny to think about somebody, an indie musician in her 30s with all of the older people.
It's definitely an older crowd. And actually, she's traveling with her dad and two other couples.
Right.
Who are, her parents' best friends. And it was supposed to be the three couples. And now I just like the kind of fish out of the water, odd man out feel of that.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting was sort of the commentary on what happens to people these days, like when she has a very public breakdown and how fast news travels and the ability to have these videos everywhere online. It takes 2 seconds to look her up and see what happened. And it makes something that used to be a smaller thing loom so much larger.
Sure. It's, we obviously live in a really connected public world, and there are benefits to that and really joyful things about it. But the downside is when, a moment that you didn't necessarily want captured gets captured and it follows you around. And I think, like Greta in the story, it's just becomes a thing to overcome and to move past. And And, she's trying to do that. But it's especially with a level of fame and the level of being a public person, that's a very real thing that people have to deal with often.
It is, and it kind of looms in her mind the entire time. Like, are they going to have seen that video? Or is somebody going to bring it up to me? That embarrassment of that incident for her.
Sure, yeah, it tails you. And
right.
Every new person you meet, yeah, you're wondering. And it just the ripple effects of kind of one moment. And in her case, it's not like a moment where she screwed up or she did something terrible, or it's a moment of vulnerability. And I think, for an artist, to show a vulnerable moment on stage and have that be the thing that kind of kicks off uncertainty and doubt, they all kind of get compounded. It's already like I said, it's already a career with a lot of uncertainty and doubt. And so it becomes this kind of endless loop of like, you show yourself being vulnerable and then you get kind of slammed for that. And then, but you have to be vulnerable again to write new music and to, so it's just a tricky balance of emotion.
Absolutely. Another thing I really enjoyed was Ben's love of Jack London. So where did that come from?
I wish I could say that I was a massive Jack London fan, and that's where that came from. I am, I really like his work and I have read a lot of it, but I sort of worked backwards and wanted to find an author who had experiences in Alaska and who had written about Alaska to kind of like hinge this character on. The character of Ben, he's a professor of history who has written a novel that is a fictionalized version of Jack London's life and his adventures in Alaska. Jack London had this kind of one period of his life, one season of his life really, where he went up in the Klondike Gold Rush and he had all these kind of adventures, and it was exciting in some ways and very grim in other ways. And I wanted him to be obsessed with somebody who had an Alaskan connection so that he would be on the ship lecturing about it. And it was really fun once I chose that to kind of dive in. And I hadn't read Call of the Wild since I was a kid, and it's just fun. And it's always fun reading about, I think Alaska is fascinating, and to read, all the kind of nonfiction stories about London's adventures there, to have the idea of this kind of mild-mannered professor, kind of nerdy writer who's just always, completely lionized this author was fun to explore.
Well, it was fun to read as well. Well, what was it like switching from YA to writing adult fiction?
It's been really wonderful. Like I said, I've written, I think 8 or 9 young adult novels, and it's been just one of the biggest privileges of my life to get to talk to teens, to get when you're writing for teens and they love a book, they will tell you. And when they hate a book, they will tell you. And they are just so honest, but their enthusiasm is unparalleled. And it's been just a joy to do it. And, a couple of the books actually got the movies filmed last year. So they'll be out at some point, hopefully in the next year or so. And it's been really fun to kind of revisit them in that way. And it's just all been really wonderful. But I'm also, getting older, and it's after a decade plus of writing about teens and teen years, it was really nice to get to write about somebody who's closer to my own age and whose experiences are closer to my experiences. And it was just, it gave me a little bit more freedom and leeway to get deeper and more vulnerable because the emotions are closer to my own. And especially with Greta, I'm not a rock star, shockingly, and I don't even play the guitar. I might be tone deaf, but as a writer, as somebody who's made my living doing this for a while and has been, publishing for over a decade, the emotions are similar. Those worries and doubts and the joys and the feeling of all the rejections that pile up along the way, and the, being an artist is such there's a wild juxtaposition between, you have to have this like unshakable belief in yourself, and at the same time, you are aware that the bottom could drop out at any moment. And so it was just, I was going to say it was fun to channel those emotions. I think cathartic's probably the better word, but it was nice to write about a character who's, again, not a rock star, but in other ways, a lot closer to me.
Well, and just to do something different after you've written a number of YA books.
Sure. I mean, it's been such a lovely thing, and I hope to do more of it. But in the past few years, I wrote this novel. I wrote my first screenplays. I wrote my first picture book, and it's been really fun to shake things up and try new things and different challenges.
What about having worked in the publishing world? Did that inform your writing at all of this book? Did you do anything differently that you would have otherwise done, do you think?
I think it took me a lot longer to write this book because I had been in the publishing industry. And I always worked. So for years, I was an editor on the adult side, and I was always looking for and acquiring and hoping to buy and publish books like this. And it was okay to write YA while I was doing that because it always felt a bit different. But I think once I sat down to write the kind of book I used to sit around in editorial meetings and discuss the merits of, it was a little bit trickier, honestly. And I felt more reluctant to let it go when it was done. I felt more nervous to show it to people. I felt like the stakes were higher in a way because it was, it was the kind of book that I just had worked on the other side of the table on. Ultimately, I think it pushed me to make it even better because I really worked on it and worked on it for years. I mean, the other thing is I had always kind of sold my young adult novels on, the first 60 or 70 pages and then written the rest. Whereas this, I held on to it for years, and it was kind of my side project that was my, not quite secret project, but it was the thing that I was always just excited to go to when I hit another deadline for something else. And it was the thing that I always said, if I never got it to where I wanted it to be, I wouldn't show it to anybody. I felt really convicted about it. And I just wanted it to be the best version of it that it could be. And, I'm really proud of it. I've never been quite so proud of a book before. I really worked to kind of get it where I wanted it. And it's more personable and more vulnerable in certain ways. And so it's been a wonderful experience, but a tough one in some ways. And I'm just now excited for it to go out into the world.
So I read it a while ago, and then I flipped through it this morning, quickly, but got through the whole book again so we could talk and I could refresh myself. And I was trying to decide what it is when a book just completely overwhelms you, like when I just love a book, like what it is about that book. And, it's just one of those feelings. And so I guess as an editor, I'm sure you experience that many times. Like, I just love this book. It's because this, and this. It must be hard to try to recreate that, I guess. So on your side, you're like, I know the feeling of what it's like when I hold a book like that. So I want everybody else to have that feeling, and probably to get it where you feel like it's good enough for that would be hard.
I think that's right. And I think part of that is yes, you can be sort of in your head about it because you're thinking, well, everyone's time is precious. And, even big readers only have the capacity to read so many books. And I know the feeling when I pick up a book and can't put it down and want to tell everybody I love it. And it makes me emotional and it makes me laugh and it makes me cry. And so you can get in your head, especially at the beginning where you're like, okay, I want to do this and I want to make it as good as possible. And I want to make a book that people really love. And I think what ends up happening at a certain point is that, you have to step out of your head and your heart kind of takes over. And it's just, you pour a lot of emotion into it. And, you never know if it all comes together. There's such an alchemy to this, to writing. And, you can have all the ingredients and sometimes they just don't come together. And sometimes they do. And it's been so gratifying to have such a wonderful response when we sent it out to editors. It's been such a wonderful response as it's gone out to more and more readers. And it's all you ever hope for is that people love the book. And I think after doing this for so long, I am so well aware that this is a kind of a funny job and a funny industry. And it's not a straight line. I wrote 2 books before my first one ever got published. And then my first 2 books got published, sold about 2 copies each. My third published book was the first to break out. But I will say, since then, I've had books that the publisher's been very behind that didn't really sell very much. I've had books that nobody expected much out of that went on to just, through word of mouth become big hits. And I've had everything in between. And I think the longer you do it, what you realize is you just have to control what you can control, which is the book itself. And by that, I mean, you have to put everything into it and you have to put your heart into it and you have to and then you send it out into the world and the best you don't know what'll happen. And the best you can hope for is that you're really proud of it. So it's, that's the case with this one. And in a way it makes you kind of, more relaxed about it. And you think, whatever, I hope readers love it, but at a certain point it's theirs and not mine. And it's, that's all you can do is they're like messages in a bottle that you're sending out into the world and you put your stamp on them and then you see what happens.
Well, it is such a mysterious process. And I always find it fascinating to watch that. The books that the publishers are really behind, the ones, as you mentioned, that sometimes, due to other things coming out or whatever else is happening, they're maybe not as much behind, but then those books take off.
Mhm.
Obviously there's no formula or people would have it and it'd be so easy to predict this book will be popular, this book will not. But it's just so interesting to see how it all plays out.
It really is. And at the end of the day, like I said, it's just, when I think about this book, especially it's about a musician, it's about a rock star, and the way in order to write it, I watched a lot of videos of rock stars and guitarists and people doing sets. And what I've come to know is that that's a louder, more, it's got a bigger immediate impression to play music on a stage in front of an audience. And there is an electricity to that, to being in a room where that's happening. But I also think there's something even more personal and more kind of vital and important about what happens between a writer and a reader. It's not the same. You're not in an auditorium of screaming fans, but it is a message in the bottle. And it's something that, and the best hope is as you hand it off, often metaphorically, to readers, that then they read it and love it and hand it off to the next person. And that's where the magic of this happens. It's just people connecting.
Well, and you articulated it way better than I did. But it is that feeling of laughing and crying and really wanting to know what's going to happen to these characters, being done with the book and being sad that it's over, but loving the ending.
Yes.
And then obviously the number one part of it is wanting to tell everyone I know, you must read this book,
Yes.
and I think you just become I don't know what the right word for it is, but you become evangelical about a book, and you're just like, this is the book you must read. Yep. And so I think, yes, that's what happens. It's just interesting to see how it happens sometimes.
Yeah. And I think, as you said, nobody really knows. It's just, it's just right. Organic.
It is, which is wonderful.
Yes.
No spoilers. So I loved the ending. I'm not going to say how it ends, but did you have that in your mind the whole time? Or did that happen as you were writing?
I always know the general feeling I want to leave the reader with at the end. And I knew I was working towards the big kind of set piece scene that happens at the end. But the moment you're probably talking about, which is the moment that everybody keeps telling me made them cry, at the end of the book, I didn't know it was going to happen until I was in the scene and writing it. I thought something else was going to happen there. So, I don't outline my books, which often feels like a wildly inefficient way to write. And I wish that I could and did and would. But every once in a while, when something like that happens, and you feel like your subconscious really like came and saved the day when you're in a moment that you literally didn't know what was going to happen until you wrote your way into it. Those are the best kinds as a writer. And that ending, it's just been a real crowd pleaser of an ending. And it's my favorite moment in the book. And so, yes, I hope people like it.
Well, I always think it's fascinating to hear how titles come about. Some authors title their book at the beginning and that stays all the way through. Sometimes they don't title them at all. Sometimes the editor says no thank you to the title. How did your title come about?
Oh man, with all the books I've written, I've had a couple where I knew right at the beginning, but most of mine are 11th hour, nail biter, stressful, terrible, like frantically trying to look up passages of Shakespeare and poems and like looking anywhere for inspiration. This was like that, unfortunately. The amount of nautical terms I now know as I was trying to reach for a title.
That's hilarious.
I think titles are very hard. And all the titles I could think of for this had to do with like ships and water and or musical notes and things like that. And they all felt very staid. And a friend of mine who's also a novelist, Morgan Matson, she writes really wonderful YA books. We were hanging out one day and she's very good at brainstorming and she actually thought up the title. And to me, I joke still that the title is like 30% pluckier than the book is. But there's something kind of sticky and catchy about it that I really liked. And it obviously works on, more than one level. And so we kind of, it was a placeholder for a little bit and then we didn't have anything better and it kind of grew on everybody, which is often what happens where you have a title that you float ship funds and then it really just grows on everybody and then you have a hard time thinking of it any other way.
I love titles that have more than one meaning. And so I felt this was a really good one for that very reason.
Good. It's a fun one.
It is a fun one. So is it difficult to write the relationship with Greta and Conrad, her father? They really struggle, and I felt for both of them. Was that difficult?
It was difficult. I wanted it. That's what I wanted you to feel. I wanted you to really see both their sides, and neither of them are all wrong, and neither of them are all right. They're just, like I said, two people who have lost their translator in Greta's mother, and they are just basically trying to like figure out how to have a relationship without her. And it's hard because, Conrad, her dad's, a lot of his worry, it comes out of his worry comes from a place of love, his worry for her. And he's a very deeply practical Midwestern person. And then on the same side, like, Greta's wanting his support and she wants him to show up the way her mom always showed up. And so I wanted them to both be sympathetic and also both be frustrating. And, there's a scene that I won't give away, but where a lot of this comes to head. And it was the hardest scene in the book. It stalled me for months, literally months, because it was just the kind of the heart of everything. And it was the moment where all their different threads and issues had to come together. And then it had to kind of send them off in a new direction. And so it was a complicated relationship and a challenge to kind of really dig in on it. But ultimately, I wanted there to be a kindness to it all because everything does come from a place of deep love. It's just they're two people who don't really understand each other.
And are so frustrated with the years of not getting along, and those things really build up, and it's hard to let it go.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I always say like my parents are kind of like both the parents. They are my greatest cheerleaders, like Greta's mom. They will go into a bookstore and, move my books to the front tables and rearrange everything. And they love reading the reviews, and they're just like Greta's mom with a scrapbook. They're just huge cheerleaders, but they are also, really practical people who probably would have been excited if I had, been a lawyer or something else and not do something that's in the arts and that's kind of such a leap, really. And so I could really feel both those things as I was writing and just, wanted to explore that relationship.
And without any spoilers, I love the way that resolved as well.
Thank you. It was, like I said, I wanted the arc of it to have a kindness to it. So it's, they are frustrating people who have a lot of frustrations with each other, but there's a lot of love there as well.
Absolutely. Do you think you'll continue to write adult fiction?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on a new one right now, and it's another, emotional family story. And it's just been really lovely. I still hope, to write more YA too. It's, you kind of want to do all the things. I've been having such a good time trying new things, but I do feel like with Greta, like I said, this is sort of the most proud I've been of a book and the most I've challenged myself and pushed myself on a book. And it makes me want to do more like it.
Have you enjoyed writing screenplays?
I have. It's almost a totally different muscle. It feels like a very different kind of thing because you're not as worried about, making the sentences sound nice. You're more laying the blueprints for something that will later have all these other moving pieces to it. And I've been lucky enough with the two of my books that filmed last year to get to be on set for those and kind of see just how much the script is a starting point versus a novel where it's the thing. And it's really fun and exciting in a totally different way. And I think I feel really lucky to have had the opportunity to do both. And I hope to keep doing both.
Yes, I bet it's a lot of fun. And then to actually see the filming of it would be just amazing.
Yeah, I didn't. So the two that filmed were based on my books. I didn't write those screenplays, but it was just such a cool, I'm adapting two others.
Got it.
Of my books, one of them on my own and one of them with a writing partner. And it's interesting. And it's, you wrote a thing and that's a separate thing, the book. And then when you write the screenplay, often to make it more visual or cinematic, you have to change it quite a bit. And it's made me laugh now that I'm, doing it because I've had people change my things quite a lot over the years when screenwriters, get their hands on them. And I never minded. I always thought, they exist as two different things, but it kind of made me laugh. I always thought if I adapted my own that, as the author, I'd be very true to it. And actually, like I've changed them more than anybody else has. So it really is. They're just kind of two different mediums in a way, but it's nice to have the freedom to try new versions of them.
Absolutely. Well, what have you read recently that you really liked?
One of the best books I read last year was The Vanishing Half, which I know is not an original recommendation, but I can't stop thinking about it. I loved it so much. I think Britt Bennett is a genius. I also recently read Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which is just gorgeous and so epic and sweeping. And I just finished reading this book that's not actually out till June, I think, that's called The Mutual Friend by Carter Bays, who's a co-creator of How I Met Your Mother. And it's got that same kind of like fun, cozy New York City feel to it that the show does. It's not related to the show, but it's just a real kind of puzzle box of a novel about social media and connection. And I'm excited for that to come out.
Well, I did love The Vanishing Half. And actually, I just recently interviewed Britt Bennett because the paperback just came out.
Oh.
So it was interesting to get to talk to her.
I was going to say, she's amazing. I that was my first book I read by her, but now I have every other one on hold at the library.
Well, The Mothers is so good. I just love that book. I read it when it came out, and it was one of those that I pressed into everybody's hand. I just thought it was so good, and I loved the kind of Greek chorus of the mothers. I just loved the whole story. I thought it was wonderful, and I love The Vanishing Half as well. But I really love The Mothers. And Great Circle has probably been mentioned by more authors than almost any other book. It's so funny how there are just certain books that come up again and again.
It's so impressive, and it's just so it's so ambitious, and it just it's transportive, and I really loved it. It was just, sometimes you're looking for a quick breezy read, and sometimes you're looking for a big fat juicy novel to really sink your teeth into and fall into, and it was sort of just what I needed at the right moment, and I loved it.
It's on my bookshelf, and I really do need to get to it, but it's just funny because even though it's been out a little while, it still continues to get mentioned.
Yeah, yes. Well, you got to read it, and I will read The Mothers, and then we'll report back.
There you go. Well, Jennifer, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the Thoughts from a Page podcast, and I can't wait for everybody to read The Unsinkable Greta James.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hello, and welcome to Novel Conversations, a podcast about the world's greatest stories. I'm your host, Frank Lavallo, and for each episode of Novel Conversations, I talk to two readers about one book. And together, we summarize the story for you. We introduce you to the characters, we tell you what happens to them, and we read from the book along the way. So if you love hearing a good story, you're in the right place. Our 9th season is coming this fall. Tune in to hear from some of the all-time great authors, Charles Dickens, Jules Verne, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and more. Subscribe to Novel Conversations wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you like this episode, and I hope you did, please follow me on Instagram at Thoughts from a Page. Consider joining my Patreon group to access bonus content. Tell all of your friends about the podcast, and rate it or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it. The book discussed today can be purchased at the Conversations from a Page bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next time.
Women's Running Stories, where we explore the intersection between running and life. Because every woman who is committed to a running journey has a story to tell, and this is where you'll find those stories. I am host and producer Cherie Louise Turner. I'm a 53-year-old runner, and together with original music by musician and runner Cormac O'Regan, we bring these inspirational stories to life. Please join us to fuel your adventures.